Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, David Rockefeller Jr. It's a last name that everybody in this room is familiar with, of course, but you may not be familiar with some of the things David has done, particularly with regard to the environment and the world's oceans. In 2000, he joined the Pew Oceans Commission and served for 3 years. And after that, in 2004, founded Sailors for the Sea. That organization later merged and became part of Oceana, which is a worldwide organization dedicated to the protection of fisheries and the health and stability of fish environments and fisheries and as a source of food throughout the world. We at the Civic Association try and bring you forums and events and discussions relevant to town matters, as we did last week with the Candidates Forum, and also matters relating to national and international affairs that we think you'll find interesting, such as when we had Senator Reid from the Armed Services Committee, Paul Tudor Jones, and upcoming we'll have Chuck Todd at our annual fundraiser breakfast on March 18th. But today's conversation really is a confluence of both our interest in local matters and global matters. The oceans and the things that are going on with respect to pollution, global warming, and so on with the oceans are obviously a matter of great global interest. But it's also a matter of great local interest. As a 13-mile barrier island, the oceans are our doorstep. So we're very pleased to have David Rockefeller here with us today to talk about these topics. And David, thank you very much for being with us. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you. Is my mic on? Yes, it is. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for those nice and apt words of introduction, and good afternoon, friends of the ocean. Madam Mayor and ladies and gentlemen, just great to be here. In the past 2 winters, actually, my wife, Susan, and I have been privileged to spend time not only in Palm Beach, but also in Miami and Sarasota. So we're becoming more familiar, I'm glad to say, with Florida than we were before. So, remarkably, scientists have been slow to catch up with the chemistry, biology, and physical dynamics of marine systems, even though the human species has been setting sail for well more than 1,000 years, and people have depended upon ocean protein since the earliest days of coastal Homo sapiens. Now, as a lifelong sailor, I have always thought of myself as a lover of the oceans, the challenge, the beauty, the mystery, the changing weather. My global sailing adventures, that's me at Cape Horn, as well as some family cruises, have led to my greater understanding of navigation, risk management, provisioning, and choosing well one's shipmates. However, not until I was nearly 60 years old did I truly realize that the oceans for me were only a surface, not a volume, and how little I knew about what was beneath the keel of my boat. Being fortunate enough to have been selected to serve on the Pew Oceans Commission, 2000 to 2003 we worked, I was treated to, you might say, a graduate course in ocean biology, chemistry, and physics. We 15 commissioners visited a dozen fishing ports around the United States, from Maine to Alaska, from the Great Lakes to Florida. And we heard testimony from academics, politicians, scientists, and certainly fishermen. The result of our work was a report on the health of our nation's oceans within its exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, 200 miles from shore, and the red on the chart, by the way, is the U.S. exclusive economic zone, and you'll notice many patches in the Pacific that add substantially to it. And at the Commission, there was much that we found that was disturbing. Coastal development was threatening the health of nearby wetlands, as well as estuaries, both of which serve as nurseries for valuable fish species. 60% of our coastal rivers and bays were seriously degraded by nutrient runoff originating from farms and private lawns, and leading to algal blooms and the damaging of nearby coral reefs. Many commercially crucial fish species on both coasts were being overfished, some being driven to extinction. Invasive species were entering our coastal waters carried by shipping from foreign ports and severely altering habitat and food webs. And, perhaps most notably and shockingly, we learned that 90% of the large pelagic fish had been removed by human effort from the oceans in the 50-year period prior to the millennium. So the oceans are an extraordinarily dynamic and positive part of our life on Earth, whether or not we actually live near them. They are a vital source of carbon sequestration, with the bottom silts being enormous repositories of sunk carbon from the atmosphere. And since the oceans account for more than 70% of the Earth's surface, this is a tremendous gift to our planet. Especially for those who live in coastal counties, nearly half of the Earth's population, by the way, or more than 3 billion people, the oceans operate as a stunning balance wheel for terrestrial temperatures, cooling us in the summer, warming us in the winter. Now, whether you're a coastal or an inland resident, you can certainly appreciate the role of the oceans in producing wild-caught protein. Both finfish and crustacea, and the oceans do so without the added provision of fresh water, soil, or fertilizer, which are, of course, needed for terrestrial cultivation. And more than 1 billion people worldwide depend upon seafood as their principal source of protein, many of them living at the poverty level. And nearly 3 billion people a day have a meal which includes an ocean protein. For each of us who is a coastal resident or visitor, the ocean holds all sorts of psychic, aesthetic, and physical benefits. Whether you're a beachcomber, a plein air painter, a surfer, a diver, a boater, or, as I am, a sailor, you surely know how much pleasure and emotional buoyancy the ocean environment can deliver. And of course, there are follow-on economic benefits to seafood restaurants, seaside inns, lifeguards, and commercial fishermen, which are enormous, not to mention the benefits of ocean life derived by travel agents, airlines, beachwear outlets, and purveyors of sports gear. When Oceana, more about them later, was fashioning a campaign to resist the permitting of offshore drilling on the Atlantic's continental shelf, who were the local champions opposing the effort? Why, of course, the representatives of commercial infrastructure in dozens of mid-Atlantic towns. They organized, they banded together, and they won the day in favor of clean oceans and sustainable seacoast life. So, as Michael mentioned, I founded a small nonprofit called Sailors for the Sea, SFS, in 2004, following the Pew Commission work, and we initiated programs aiming at educating sailors, young and old, about challenges to the health of our oceans. Meanwhile, my wife, Susan, had joined a much larger global ocean conservation NGO called Oceana, and she regaled me with their efforts to protect wild fisheries around the world in abundant EEZs. Remember that 200-mile limit. So we began to strategize how Sailors for the Sea and Oceana might complement each other. Oceana, with 250 employees, a budget of $45 million, and offices in 10 cities around the globe seemed like a whale compared to the little salmon, which was Sailors for the Sea. Now, my goal for SFS from early on was to educate and activate at least 10% of American sailors to become ocean conservationists. And we're well on our way. Thank you, Susan, for your vision and your welcome to Oceana. Let me say a few words about Oceana itself. With a board of 25 individuals drawn from all around the world, yes, Ted Danson and Sam Waterston are there for you who are in the front rows. We helped the staff to raise nearly $50 million in annual support. We have no endowment for our programs. Each of our 10 global offices has 12 to 15 local employee experts in communications, political action, marine science, law, and government. We operate campaigns to protect the health and sustainability of the local fisheries. An example would be the creation of marine protected areas, which are usually no fishing zones. And one of the most notable successes Oceana has achieved in 20 years of operations is the incubation and spin-off of Global Fishing Watch, now a separate NGO which uses satellite technology to identify the position and activity of fishing boats around the world, and which is an open source platform reporting any suspicious or inappropriate activity in protected waters. Oceana's sobriquet is Save the Oceans, Feed the World. We are not just focused on high-end consumers who import king crab and lobster to fancy restaurants, although those species are certainly worth saving, but we emphasize that 1 billion of the world's poorer people depend upon ocean-based protein each day, and too often their favored fish, like sardines and anchovies, are also used in the global animal feed market. The state of Florida and its residents obviously depend enormously on the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico for its weather, its recreation, and its economy. Since I've given variations of this talk before in New York and Massachusetts, I decided to do some additional research on Florida's exclusive economic zone, and especially on recent trends of importance to you coastal residents here. I was actually surprised to find that Florida ranks only 7th in the ratio of shoreline to square mileage of land area. First is Maryland. That surprised me. But just imagine that Florida's shoreline gross state product, or GSP, is over $4 billion, and it's 2.5 times its inland economy. Because of a strong fisheries law nationwide, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, I'm happy to report that 50% of 50 species of fish have been rebuilt nationwide since the turn of the century, less than 25 years ago. So isn't it great to have some good news against an often grim backdrop of climate challenges? And it's especially good news for the fishermen, both recreational and commercial, here in Florida. Another Florida positive is that the rate of manatee deaths has been dropping over the past 3 years. Hope that continues. And of all the 2023 fatalities, only 17% of them were attributable to watercraft strikes. A final positive report is that sea turtle nesting, notably the green sea turtle and the loggerheads, had a record positive year in 2023. So protection efforts in Florida are making a difference. Other local news, ocean news, however, is not so happy. Global sea surface temperatures have increased about 1 degree Fahrenheit in the last 20 years, and in July of last year, the shallow waters off Florida topped 100 degrees, a level normally associated with hot tubs. As you know, these spikes in sea temperature, especially if prolonged, can be devastating for coral reef ecosystems, themselves vital breeders of marine life. Now, you may have read reports from a month ago that the coast of Maine, where Susan and I spend summers, suffered from a damaging confluence of tide, wind, and waves, which resulted in powerful surges many feet above average along its extensive shorelines. Fishing shacks floated away and dock systems were very badly damaged. Many coastal fishermen will surely be challenged to rebuild. This, of course, raises the question of sea level rise, where Florida's low profile to the ocean is especially challenged. The estimate globally is that sea level has risen a modest 8 inches since 1950, but much more ominously, it is estimated to have been rising 1 inch every 3 years in the last decade. The rate of acceleration is clearly stimulated by a warming globe, especially in the polar zones where land-based glaciers are sliding into the oceans at an increasing rate of speed. This rise in sea level is, of course, exacerbated by the greater frequency and intensity of coastal storms. Not that I need to tell you here in Florida about them. New docks in Maine are mandated to be built from 1 to 3 feet higher than previously. Will it be enough? And for how long? Now, I'm happy to report that the work of Oceana has recently had positive impacts on the health of Florida's coastline in at least 2 ways. As I mentioned, we led a successful effort in 2020 to establish a moratorium on offshore drilling for oil and gas, a measure supported by 100 Florida municipalities and 6,000 Florida businesses who viewed that the risks to Florida's tourism business outweighed the foregone oil and gas revenue. Secondly, Oceana and its Florida allies have initiated 22 bans of polystyrene, balloons, and single-use plastic water bottles. And a recent National Geographic survey found that tourism would be 8% higher if there were no plastic pollution on Florida's beaches. So the message is each of us can do our best to use non-plastic alternatives wherever possible. Some of you have witnessed the red tides along the coast of Florida, a naturally occurring condition which is cyclical in the ocean's chemistry, but which is clearly exacerbated by warming ocean temperatures. Adding to this seasonal hazard, principally occurring on Florida's Gulf Coast and an obvious threat to local tourist economy, there is now the sudden appearance of sargassum weed, a phenomenon which previously only appeared in the open ocean between Africa and North America, and which is a type of a floating garden in which hundreds of species of sea creatures, crabs and the like, take refuge from larger prey. However, when this otherwise benign, if not productive, garden comes ashore, once again, Florida is the favored destination so far, the result can be massive clogging of the beaches, subsequent widespread decay, and noxious pollution of the local atmosphere. So going back to the global stage, coral reefs are among the most magnificent manifestations of natural processes the oceans have ever supported. They are the nurseries for thousands of species of sea life, and certainly a highly prized destination for divers around the globe. But alas, because of the combination of marine temperature rise and pollution from ships and land-based activities, at least 25% of the world's corals are bleached and dying. Susan and I visited the Great Barrier Reef. We visited the Great Barrier Reef for the first time last year, and we frankly went with a sense that it could soon be too late to see some of the greatest coral displays in the world. So I urge the rest of you who haven't been there not to wait too long. I previously mentioned the threats to ocean health of riparian mining activities, but it should also be noted that agriculture, when pursued without proper regard for the negative impacts of runoff from the fields into the rivers, can pose an equal threat to ocean health. In the U.S., it's well known that the Mississippi River, carrying millions of tons of soil and chemicals from Midwestern farmland downstream, causes an annual 200-mile wide dead zone, that's it, the greenish blob there, in the Gulf of Mexico, where the resulting lack of ocean oxygen creates an inhospitable environment for the valuable fishing stocks to survive. So I hope I have left you with a clearer picture of some of the threats to ocean health, but have also suggested that the oceans are resilient and are susceptible to significant improvements in the condition of both critical habitats and fish stocks under the proper regulatory regime. Let me conclude by saluting all of the scientists and deep-sea specialists who have brought to light the condition of our beautiful but challenged oceans. Since the early days of ocean exploration, the Vikings visited our hemisphere in the year 1000, sailors and explorers have taken great risk to make discoveries of distant lands and waters. Many have lost their lives doing so. But ironically to me, the great age of space exploration in our time preceded the age of deep-sea travel. How many more valuable species of living things there are to be discovered in the world's oceans than one can find on the surface of nearby planets. So I hope that the 21st century will rectify that imbalance and that each of us will benefit from future discoveries in the ocean deeps. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer some questions, which I'm going to take from a chair because I have a new knee and it's telling me to sit down. Thank you. Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's open it up for some questions, please. Yes.
What can be done about the Chinese fishing industry, which sends large commercial vessels all over the world, all over the oceans, ignoring protected areas and harvesting fish?
Yes, very important question. And I mentioned Global Fishing Watch, which is one of the answers to that you have to identify those fishing boats that are in places they shouldn't be, or fishing for fish that they're not authorized to fish for. And then, of course, you need enforcement, and deep sea enforcement is a tricky thing. We don't have police out there in the middle of the ocean, but at least we now have the capacity to identify those who are not following the international regulations. So I think increased international enforcement is the answer. Whether we can bilaterally affect that, I think, is a tricky question. And I'm not a politician or a member of the State Department, so I'm not well informed about what we might do bilaterally. But the fact is, and they're fishing off of Africa, they're fishing all over the world, and frankly, often interfering with the livelihoods of local fishermen who may not have sufficient support of their local governments to protect against the Chinese. It's an important question. It's not only the Chinese, but they're probably the number one. You're absolutely right. Thanks for the question.
Michael Ainsley, and we do have microphones. My colleagues William Kelly and Claudia Shea will bring a microphone to you.
You mentioned a shocking number that 90% of large fish have been fished out. Can you tell us some success stories? Are there any species that are being returned and growing again?
Yes, absolutely. And that was a figure from the last 50 years of the last century and had not been known. We're now much more capable than we were in the 20th century of measuring fish stocks and understanding what a sustainable yield would be. So science is absolutely key. And as I think I mentioned, there are 50 stocks in the U.S. that have rebounded because the fisheries institutions, the government fisheries associations have understood and believed and supported the science and created rules that guide both commercial and recreational fishermen. So that there are many, I don't have at the tip of my tongue exactly which those 50 were, but if you give me a card, I'd be glad to find them for you.
Yes, John David Corey and William, if you'd bring the microphone to John, please.
Thank you very much. What can we do as individuals? What can you give us as our marching orders to help?
Really important question. Both Susan and I, from early on, were very, very concerned about the plastic issue. And it looks to me, in my brief time here in Florida, as though you're doing a good job now keeping the plastic off of the coast. But certainly reducing the amount of single-use plastic that we use or that we accept. Susan used to embarrass me by talking to people in restaurants about how wrong it was that they were giving us plastic cups and plastic silverware and so forth. We still use the word silverware for plastic. But certainly that is one thing. If you're a boater, also using materials on your boat that do not ruin the natural ocean systems, and paint manufacturers more and more are turning to using non-toxic materials, and certainly not throwing things over from your boat that don't do well in the ocean. We see these terrible photographs of turtles and whales and others that are all tangled up in plastic, or albatross, famous photograph from the Pacific. So I certainly think that's a very important thing. And then we're all voters, so to become more knowledgeable about what the issues are and the complicated interactions between human activities and ocean health. And if you're a recreational fisherman and you're supposed to catch and release, please do that. I think, there are quite a few things that can be done by us as individuals. And if we're not aware, I think more often than ever before, our children will tell us what we should be doing, and that's a great thing. Yeah.
I've observed plastics in other countries where people still do leave an unconscionable amount on the beaches. When they're 30 feet from a trash bin, they leave all kinds of plastic on the beaches in South Africa, for instance. But I'm wondering if there's both, I know there's commercial and altruistic efforts to clean up these large plastic islands on the world's oceans. And I'm wondering if there's biological processes such as maybe we have forms of life that can clean up plastic. That's been done with hydrocarbons, for instance, with fungi of all things, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah. No, important. These great, as you say, islands of plastic that have been discovered in the Pacific, most notably, but around all the oceans. And as far as I know, there has been no successful broad-scale effort to convert that plastic into something more benign. I know there are scientists and others who are working on it. So my view and the view of Oceana is cut it off at the source. That's the most important thing we can do. And horrifyingly, we have learned that only 9 or 10% of recycled plastic is effectively permanently out of the ecosystem, that only 9%, so 90% is still going back into landfill or the ocean. So I think the science to determine alternatives to our current plastics, which of course are miraculous. They have done so many things for us, but it turns out that they're also very noxious. And most plastics turn into nodules, tiny little hard-to-see nodules that are ingested by fish. And guess what? When we ingest the fish, we get them in our systems too. We don't yet have the medical evidence that shows what the long-term deleterious effect of these pellets, plastic pellets, are to human health, but it's not going to be positive. And so let's keep them out of the oceans, out of our lives, and encourage scientists to discover alternatives. We're working at Oceana with Coca-Cola and Amazon to reduce the amount of plastic that they use in their packaging and bottling, and we've made some early successes. If some of you have received a slim little book in an Amazon package recently, you may notice that it's not as smothered in plastic as it used to be. So that's a good thing, progress.
So I have a question on catch and release. I mean, I'm a fly fisherman. We can barb our hooks and we do catch and release. But as a deep sea fisherman, how can you do catch and release? And do they ever do catch and release?
Well, that's beyond my pay grade. Maybe a deep sea fisherman knows the answer to that. I see the problem, but I would say one thing, which is to be aware as a deep sea fisherman, and you obviously are in love with these miraculous fish that you catch. It would be horrifying to think that you might be catching the last few. So staying in touch with the statistics about how the fisheries are doing is a very important thing, but I wonder if anybody else in the audience knows the answer to catch and release of deep sea fish. That'll be for another time then.
And Nina, please.
Hi, I hope I'm not going to embarrass my great uncle Stan with this question. You showed a beautiful picture of the Great Barrier Reef, and you mentioned pesticides. Did you notice any sort of pattern of the runoff of the pesticides in the reef? And are you addressing those with Oceana?
Yes, well, Oceana is not active yet in Australia, where the Great Barrier Reef principally is. What we learned when we were there a few months ago is that it's the near reefs. There are near reefs, middle reefs, and outer reefs. The further you get out, the more that those reefs are protected from leaching from the land. And sugarcane is a major industry on the eastern coast of Australia, and sugarcane uses a lot of fertilizer, which does flow into the sea and does definitely damage the near shore. The outer shore, I think, are immune from that particular one, thank heavens. And so they're among the most beautiful. So if you get there and have a chance to get way offshore, that's where the still most beautiful reefs are.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please give our special guest and keynote speaker, David Rockefeller, a round of applause.
Thank you.